The UDA West Belfast Brigade is the section of the Ulster loyalist paramilitary group, the Ulster Defence Association, based in the western quarter of Belfast, in the Greater Shankill area. Initially a battalion, the West Belfast Brigade emerged from the local defence associations active in the Shankill at the beginning of the Troubles and became the first section to be officially designated as a separate entity within the wider UDA structure. During the 1970s and 1980s, the West Belfast Brigade was involved in a series of killings as well as establishing a significant presence as an outlet for racketeering. The brigade reached the apex of its notoriety during the 1990s when Johnny Adair emerged as its leading figure. Under Adair's direction, the West Belfast Brigade in general and its sub-unit C Company in particular became associated with a killing spree in the neighbouring Catholic nationalist districts of West Belfast, with Adair and his supporters suspicious of the developing Northern Ireland peace process and the combined Loyalist Military Command ceasefire of 1994. The West Belfast Brigade increasingly came to operate as a rogue group within the UDA, feuding with rival Loyalists in the Ulster Volunteer Force before splitting from the UDA altogether in late 2002. Ultimately Adair was forced out, and the brigade was brought back into the mainstream UDA. It continues to organize, albeit with less significance than in its heyday. Matt Kincaid is the incumbent West Belfast Brigade leader, and under his leadership the brigade has again become estranged from the wider UDA origins. The origins of the UDA lay in West Belfast with the formation of vigilante groups such as the Ulster Defence Association and the Woodvale Defence Association. The latter, formed by Charles Harding Smith, became the largest of a number of similar groups and was instrumental in the establishment of the UDA in September 1971, having begun military training of its members 2 months earlier. In 1972, when Jim Anderson was serving as acting chairman of the UDA, a West Belfast Battalion was formed as a separate part of the UDA. Such was the volume of membership within the area. The battalion was divided into 3 separate companies: a company, which was based on the Highfield estate with some members in Glencairn; B Company, which covered the Woodvale area; and C Company for the Shankill Road itself. Battalions covering the other 3 areas of Belfast as well as South East Antrim and North Antrim and Londonderry were formed soon afterwards, and before long these were redesignated as brigades after the UDA experienced a rush of members. Charles Harding Smith. The battalion fell under the initial control of Davy Fogel, under whose leadership the group undertook a program of erecting barricades between the Shankill and the neighbouring Republican Falls and Springfield roads. However, the local strongman was Harding Smith, who had been held in prison on charges of gun running in London. When he returned in early 1973, Harding Smith ran Fogel out of the area and became commander of the battalion himself, whilst also becoming joint chairman of the UDA as a whole with Anderson. Harding Smith soon became embroiled in a feud with East Belfast leader Tommy Heron, whilst also facing a growing rival in his own area in the shape of Andy Tyree, the commander of A Company. Tyree was chosen as the overall chairman of the UDA in 1973, with Anderson off the scene. Tyree had initially been seen as a compromise candidate between the 2 real powerhouses of Harding Smith and Heron, but before long he began to assert his independence. Heron was killed in late 1973, and soon after Tyree and Harding Smith became openly hostile after Tyree sanctioned a trip by UDA activists to Libya. Harding Smith publicly condemned the move, arguing that Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi UDA was a friend of the Provisional IRA, and in January 1975 he announced the secession of the West Belfast Brigade from the UDA. However, after a power struggle, Harding-Smith was driven out of Northern Ireland following 2 failed attempts on his life, according to Peter Taylor, by one of Tyree's men. The West Belfast Brigade immediately returned to the mainstream UDA fold. The West Belfast area also saw the formation in 1973 of the Ulster Freedom Fighters by former Harding-Smith ally John White, modelled on the Red Hand Commando. The UFF was to be an armed elite of killing units to be nominally separate from the legal UDA but actually a flag of convenience under which UDA members could kill Catholics. The model soon spread from West Belfast to the rest of the UDA. Tommy Little. When Harding-Smith left Northern Ireland in 1975, Tommy Little was chosen as his replacement as brigadier, following a brief interlude during which John McClatchy served as leader. Under Little, however, the West Belfast Brigade entered a period of stagnation, and from being the main area of activity it fell way behind the new centres of North and South Belfast. A rare foray into murder by a member of the brigade proved somewhat disastrous during the 1977 Ulster Workers' Council strike. Kenny McClinton stopped a bus as part of a road blockade and, entering the vehicle, shot and killed driver Harry Bradshaw, a Protestant. This, along with press revelations that the UDA had written a letter of apology to his widow in which they enclosed a £10 note, helped to further undermine the already unpopular strike. During the 1980s, James Craig, another former associate of Harding-Smith, had been attached to the West Belfast Brigade as fundraiser-in-chief, a role which saw the brigade move increasingly towards racketeering. Craig particularly favoured protection rackets that targeted Belfast's building firms and gained a lot of money through these, both for the brigade and for himself. Arrested in 1985 for racketeering, the case collapsed and he returned to the Shankill but was soon asked to leave because of his personal enrichment, and he left to link up the John McMichael's South Belfast Brigade instead. According to Billy Twister McQuiston, a member of the West Belfast Brigade, the activities of the brigade during the 1980s helped to make the UDA unpopular on the Shankill as they were identified with gangsterism. Despite this, the West Belfast Brigade saw an influx of new young members in the 1980s, and before long Little came under pressure to give them something to do. Little shared Craig's predilection for gangsterism but was less interested in murder, and so turned to his intelligence officer Brian Nelson, who drew up a list of leading Republican targets. In October 1987, Nelson dispatched a group of raw recruits to the nationalist Ballymurphy area to kill the first of these, a 66-year-old taxi driver by the name of Francisco Notor-Antonio. Despite appearing on the list, Notor-Antonio had only ever been very loosely connected to the Irish Republican Army and Sinn Féin acute tie-in, and had ended his active associations with republicanism several years earlier. In fact, Nelson, who was the highest-ranking British intelligence agent in the UDA, had seized on Notor-Antonio at the last minute after being informed by his handlers that his initial first target was actually a high-ranking British agent in the Provisional Irish Republican Army known as Stakeknife. Stakeknife was seen as much too important to be killed, and so a last-minute switch was made. Nonetheless, the killings continued, with C Company becoming the most active, under the command of William Winky Dodds. They struck again, based on Nelson's list, on the 10th of May 1988 with the murder of Terence McDade. This murder, however, was an error, as the actual target had been his older brother Declan, whose striking physical resemblance to Terence meant that C Company had received the wrong photograph from Nelson. Nelson also provided details on Gerard Slane, who was killed by B Company on the 22nd of September 1988. Slane was shot dead at his Falls Road home, with the UDA claiming he was a member of the Irish People's Liberation Organisation. The most notorious killing was that of solicitor Pat Finnegan in February 1989, carried out by Brigade member Ken Barrett using information provided by RUC Special Branch. Little was arrested as part of the Stevens inquiries and was handed a 6-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to various offences. It has been suggested that the lenience of his sentence may have been influenced by Little himself being a Royal Ulster Constabulary agent, although this has not been confirmed. The collapse of the old leadership cleared the way for younger, more militant members to take control of the brigade and launch a new era of activity. Feud with UVF. On the 19th of August 2000, the West Belfast Brigade hosted a Loyalist Day of Culture organised by Adair on the Lower Shankill, with fellow brigadiers John, Greg, Billy McFarland, Jackie MacDonald and Jimbo Simpson in attendance. However, early in the day clashes broke out between UDA and UVF members outside the Diamond Jubilee UDA bar, and later UDA members attacked the UVF stronghold Rex bar further up the road, firing shots at the UVF men trapped inside. In response, Adair drove all UVF members and the families out of the Lower Shankill, and in doing so began the feud that his fellow brigadiers had hoped to avoid. Orders were sent up to a company in Highfield by Dodds that the estate should be cleansed of UVF members. The UVF struck back on the 21st of August, killing 2 of Adair's allies, Jackie Coulter and Bobby Marhood, on the Crumlin Road. In response, C Company members burned down the headquarters of the UVF-linked Progressive Unionist Party. Adair was arrested on the 22nd of August 2000 whilst he and Dodds were driving down the Shankill Road, with command reverting to Dodds. UVF member Samuel Rocket was shot and killed at his home by C Company the following night. The feud came to an uneasy truce soon afterwards. The militancy of the West Belfast Brigade, and in particular Adair, who had become a cult hero among loyalists, meant that the brigade enjoyed the loyalty of some UDA members outside its nominal geographic area. Within the North Belfast Brigade, an influx of new young members found more to admire in Adair than in their own brigadier Jimbo Simpson, and affiliated to the West Belfast Brigade despite not living in the area. Further afield, a group of Shankill men had relocated to areas of North Down such as Bangor and Newtownards, and they had found that support amongst young loyalists for Adair was so strong that they established a new D Company for the West Belfast Brigade there. The area was supposed to be part of the jurisdiction of the East Belfast Brigade. Adair Daredeman Expulsion. The feud had been unpopular with the other brigadiers, in particular Jackie MacDonald of the South Belfast Brigade, who had emerged as the most credible rival to Adair within the UDA. Adair sought to restart the UVF feud and challenge his fellow brigadiers in September 2002, when East Belfast LVF member Stephen Warnock was killed by the Red Hand Commando. Adair spread a rumour that East Belfast Brigade Chief Jim Gray had actually been behind the murder, and as a result Gray was shot and seriously injured when he came to the Warnock family home to commiserate soon afterwards. A meeting was convened of all brigadiers in an attempt to avert a crisis, but nothing came of it as Adair refused to bend. MacDonald's men followed Adair and reported that he conferred with his LVF allies in Ballysalan after leaving the meeting early. On this basis, MacDonald secured the agreement of the other brigadiers that Adair should be expelled from the UDA, along with his spokesman John White. Adair ignored the expulsion and directed West Belfast UDA business as usual banners on the Shankill Road. A coterie of figures within the West Belfast Brigade, and especially Adair's C Company stronghold, remained loyal to Adair as the West Belfast Brigade split off from the rest of the UDA. However, Adair's leadership now became characterized by extreme paranoia. Mo Courtney, who served as Adair's bodyguard, was amongst those to come under suspicion because of his friendship with the North Belfast-based Shokri brothers, whom Adair viewed as potential rivals. Adair dispatched a team to kill Courtney, but his friend Donald Hodgen tipped him off and Courtney escaped the Shankill before the hit could take place. Winky Dodds, whose role had diminished considerably after a stroke, also split from Adair around this time after his cousin William Muggsy Mullen had been driven from the Shankill for associating with the Shokris, and Fat Jackie Thompson had led a punishment squad in a brutal attack on Dodds' brother Milton Doddsy Dodds. Escalation and exile. The feud erupted on the 26th of December 2002 when members of the West Belfast Brigade killed mainstream UDA member Jonathan Stewart at a party, an attack that saw Adair loyalist Roy Green killed in retaliation. Adair's men then struck back on the 1st of February 2003, killing South East Antrim Brigade leader John Gregg and his friend Rab Carson as the two returned from watching ranges F.C. Gregg's killing proved the final straw, in part because he enjoyed a stellar reputation amongst loyalists for a gun attack on Gerry Adams in the 1980s. Adair, however, had a lot of bad blood with Gregg, stemming from an attack on a West Belfast Brigade member in Rathcoole and the subsequent kneecapping of the attackers by Adair's men in Gregg's area. In December 2002, the LVF had placed a bomb under Gregg's car, and soon afterwards Gregg's house and that of his ally Tommy Kirkham were attacked by West Belfast men. Gregg retaliated with a bomb attack on Adair's house on the 8th of January, 2 days before the West Belfast Brigade chief was returned to jail. Fat Jackie Thompson, who remained totally loyal to Adair, was chosen to take over as brigadier whilst Adair was in jail. MacDonald made contact with A and B companies of the West Belfast Brigade and told them that he intended to forcibly remove Adair. They accepted MacDonald's leadership and established a headquarters at the Shankill's Heather Street Social Club, where members of C Company were invited in order to defect back to the mainstream UDA. Several members did so, with Mo Courtney amongst the most prominent of those to accept the invitation. Around 100 of MacDonald's men, all heavily armed, launched an invasion of Adair's Lower Shankill stronghold in the early hours of the morning of the 6th of February and attacked the 20th members of C Company who remained loyal to Adair, driving them out of Northern Ireland. As a result of this, the West Belfast Brigade was brought back into the UDA, post-Adair, in the immediate aftermath of Adair's removal, and with Thompson one of those to have been driven out of Northern Ireland. Mo Courtney was officially confirmed in the role of brigadier. He proved a transitory figure, however, as a result of the murder of Adair supporter Alan McCulloch. McCulloch had asked Courtney if he could return from exile in Bolton and promised to tell the new brigadier the location of a large drugs stash and the home address of Gina Adair in return for his safety. Courtney agreed, but when McCulloch returned home he was taken by UDA members to Mollusk near Temple Patrick and killed on the 28th of May 2003. The killing was hugely unpopular due to the double-crossing nature of the attack, and Courtney went into hiding in Carrickfergus for fear of retaliation. He was charged with the murder, along with Ihab Shokri. A few days later, he was acquitted by a deadlock court after the evidence was adjudged flawed, although a retrial was later ordered and he was ultimately given an 8-year jail sentence after pleading guilty to manslaughter. Jim Spence, who had conspired with MacDonald to bring about Adair's downfall, replaced Courtney as brigadier following his arrest. Adair, who was mooting a comeback from prison, attacked Spence constantly in the press for his perceived treachery, although ultimately Adair left Belfast following his 2005 release. Seen as something of an undesirable by others in the UDA, Spence was removed as brigadier in 2006 in favour of Matt Kincaid. As of 2015, Kincaid remains in charge of the now much less influential West Belfast Brigade. 2013 North Belfast Brigade feud. In 2013, it was reported in the Belfast Telegraph that the leadership of the West Belfast Brigade was once again at loggerheads with the rest of the organisation. According to the report, the West Belfast Brigade had become so associated with criminality and racketeering that the three other Belfast-based brigadiers, Jackie MacDonald, Jimmy Birch and John Bunting, no longer felt able to deal with the Western leadership. Tensions had been further stoked by a graffiti campaign against Bunting's leadership on the York Road, in which expelled members of the North Belfast Brigade who had come under the wing of the counterparts in the West called for Bunting's removal as brigadier. The feud was confirmed in December 2013 when a UDA statement was released acknowledging the existence of a dissident tendency within the North Belfast Brigade but confirming support for Bunting's leadership. However, whilst the statement was signed by MacDonald and Birch, no representative of the West Belfast Brigade had added the signature. The North Belfast rebels subsequently named Robert Molyneux, a convicted killer and former friend of Bunting's closest ally John Howcroft, as the preferred choice for brigadier. Although the feud soon died down, a series of low-level tit-for-tat incidents continued, culminating in Howcroft's partner's car being burnt out in August 2014. In September 2014, it was reported in the Belfast Telegraph that the leaders of the UDA in North East and South Belfast, as well as the head of the Londonderry and North Antrim Brigade, had met to discuss the feud as well as the schism with the West Belfast Brigade. According to the report, they agreed that West Belfast Brigade members loyal to the wider UDA should establish a new command structure for the brigade, which would then take the lead in ousting Courtney, Spence and Eric Mokey from their existing leadership positions. It was also stated that the West Belfast breakaway leaders had recruited Jimbo Simpson, a former North Belfast brigadier driven out of Northern Ireland over a decade earlier, and were seeking to restore him to his former role. Brigadiers Charles Harding Smith c. 1971–1975, John McClatchy 1975, Tommy Little 1975–1990, Tommy Irvin 1990, Ken Barrett 1990, Billy Kennedy 1990, Jim Spence 1990–1993, Johnny Adair 1993–1995, William Winky Dodds 1995–1999, Johnny Adair 1999–2000, William Winky Dodds 2000–2002, Johnny Adair 2002–2003, Fat Jackie Thompson 2003, Mo Courtney 2003, Jim Spence 2003–2006, Matt Kincaid 2006–present. Bibliography Lister, David and Jordan, Hugh Mad Dog, The Rise and Fall of Johnny Adair and C. Company, Mainstream Press, MacDonald, Henry and Cusick, Jim, UDA, Inside the Heart of Loyalist Terror, Penguin Island, Mackay, Susan, Northern Protestants and Unsettled People, Blackstaff Press. Wood, Ian S., Crimes of Loyalty, A History of the UDA, Edinburgh University Press. Taylor, Peter, Loyalists, Bloomsbury.